She told me once that she almost didn't take that bus. That's the part that stays with me, the almost. The way one small, completely unremarkable decision can reach forward through time and rearrange everything. Your whole life, sitting on the edge of a single word, a single seat, a single yes instead of no. I've thought about it so many times, I've lost count. If she had taken the subway like she usually did, if she had called a cab, if she had just waited 5 more minutes and let that bus go without her. But she didn't. She got on, she sat down, and the man in the window seat looked at her just briefly, the way strangers do, and then looked away. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea what she had just walked into. My name is Claire, and this is the story of my sister Emily. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I'm not the kind of person who tells stories. I'm not the kind of person who opens up, who puts her family's life on display, who tries to make something meaningful out of pain. Emily is the storyteller. Emily has always been the one who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd known her their whole lives. I am the other one, the quiet one, the one who watches. But I'm telling this story because Emily can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way it deserves to be told. And because I was there for most of it. Because I was on the phone with her the night it all began to unravel, and I heard the exact moment her voice changed. And because some stories are too important to stay quiet, this is one of them. Emily was 31 years old when it happened. She was living in Portland, Oregon, not far from where we grew up, but far enough that she'd built something entirely her own. An apartment with tall windows and too many plants, a job she was good at and didn't love. A relationship that had been quietly dying for almost 2 years. She was the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. The kind of tired that lives in the chest and follows you from room to room. I knew it, even from 1,000 miles away. When you grow up with someone, when you share a bedroom for 15 years and you can tell the difference between the way they breathe when they're sleeping and the way they breathe when they're pretending, you carry a part of them with you wherever you go. I could hear it in our weekly calls, the slight delay before she laughed. The way she'd say, "I'm fine," with just a little too much weight on the word fine. She was not fine. But this story doesn't start with her breaking down. It starts with a Tuesday. A completely ordinary grace-keyed November Tuesday in Portland, which means it was raining. It's always raining in Portland in November. Emily had missed the last subway by 3 minutes. She'd been at the office late, finishing a proposal nobody asked her to stay for. Which was very Emily, and she was standing at a corner looking at her phone, trying to decide between waiting for the next train or catching the 47 bus that stopped half a block away, and would drop her about 10 minutes from her apartment. She caught the bus. She almost didn't, because there was a woman ahead of her at the door who was having trouble with her transit card. And Emily stood in the rain for what felt like an entire minute. Her coat soaking through at the shoulders, her patience already thin, starting to fray. But she got on, she paid. She walked toward the back. The bus was half empty. There were maybe 12, 15 people scattered throughout. A teenager with headphones. A couple sharing one earbud. An older woman with a grocery bag on her lap. And near the back, in a window seat, a man. Emily told me later she barely looked at him. He was just a shape, a silhouette against the rainy window. And she sat down in the aisle seat across from him because it was the first open seat she reached before her feet started hurting. She pulled out her phone. She put in one earbud. She was listening to a podcast, something about behavioral economics, which was very Emily, and she was fully intending to have absolutely zero interaction with any human being on that bus. That lasted about 4 minutes. She told me the man sneezed, and it wasn't a polite, contained sneeze. It was an enormous, full-body sneeze, the kind that seems to surprise even the person doing it. And he didn't have a tissue, and she, without thinking, on pure reflex, pulled a packet of tissues out of her bag and held them out without even looking up from her phone. He said thank you, and she said you're welcome. And that was it. Except it wasn't, because 30 seconds later he said, "Do you always carry tissues?" And she said, pulling out one earbud, "Always." My mother raised me paranoid. and he laughed. And she looked at him. And something shifted, not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies with swelling music and slow motion, but quietly. The way a door opens, just a crack, and lets in a sliver of light. He was older than her. Not by a huge amount, mid to late 30s, she guessed. Brown hair, a little disheveled, glasses, the kind of face that looks like it's thought about a lot of things. He was wearing a jacket that was one size too big. He looked like someone who had learned to take up less space. His name was Daniel. She didn't know that yet. She just knew he had a nice laugh, and he seemed a little lost. And the bus was warm, and the rain was still coming down hard against the windows. And for some reason, she didn't put her earbud back in. First time in Portland? She asked. She wasn't sure why. It was the kind of question you ask when you're slightly curious, but mostly just filling silence. He paused before answering. Just briefly, just long enough that she noticed it. No, he said. I used to live here. A long time ago. I'm just passing through. Something in the way he said passing through stuck with her. She told me about it later that night when she called me, and I remember her exact words. He said it like someone who was deciding whether to stay or go. It wasn't already decided. She asked him how long he'd been away. 7 years, he said. 7 years is a long time to be away from a city. Long enough that entire parts of it have changed. Long enough that the places you used to know feel like they belong to a different version of you. Emily understood that kind of distance. Not geographically, but emotionally. She'd felt it for years, that sensation of being slightly out of alignment with your own life, like a door that hangs just a little wrong in its frame. She didn't say any of this. She just said, a lot changes in 7 years. A lot does, he said. And then, are you from here? Grew up about 40 minutes away. Moved here when I was 24. Do you like it? She thought about that. Really thought about it, which surprised her. Because the automatic answer was yes, of course. It's a beautiful city, great food scene. The nature is incredible, but the honest answer was more complicated. And she wasn't sure why she was about to give a stranger the honest answer on a city bus in the rain. But she was. I like who I was when I moved here, she said. I'm less sure about who I am now. He looked at her for a moment. Not in a way that felt strange or too much, in a way that felt like someone recognizing something. I know exactly what you mean, he said. And then the bus lurched to a stop, and a group of people got on, and the moment dissolved. And Emily went back to her phone, and she didn't speak to him again for the rest of the ride. When her stop came up, she stood, gathered her bag, and walked toward the door. She didn't look back, but just before the doors opened, she heard him say, I hope things get clearer. She stepped off the bus. The doors closed. The bus pulled away through the rain. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than she needed to. She told me that night, it was the nicest thing a stranger has ever said to me. And then she laughed, a little embarrassed by how much it had meant. Which is kind of a sad thing to admit, right? I didn't think it was sad. I thought it was honest. But what I said was, so who was he? I don't know, she said. We didn't exchange numbers or anything. It was just a conversation. It was nothing. Looking back now, I know that was the exact moment everything changed. I just didn't know it yet, and neither did she. I should tell you about Marcus because you can't understand what Emily's life was like at that point without understanding Marcus. They had been together for 4 years. They'd met at a work event. He was in sales for a tech company, charming in a way that is very easy to mistake for genuine warmth. He was handsome in a specific, put-together way. He remembered small details, said the right things at the right times. And in the beginning, Emily felt seen in a way she hadn't felt seen before. But somewhere in the second year, something shifted. It was gradual enough that she couldn't point to a specific moment and say there. That was when it changed. It was more like a slow erosion. The attention became intermittent. The compliments became conditional. He began correcting her in front of people. Small corrections about details that didn't matter, facts about movies. directions, the names of restaurants, always with a smile, always with a tone that said, I'm just being accurate, but always in front of other people. He told her once that she was a lot to handle when she was emotional. He said it lightly, like an observation, like he was doing her a favor by pointing it out. She had just found out a close friend had been diagnosed with cancer. She had been crying. Emily didn't tell me most of this as it was happening. I found out later, in pieces. The way you find out things about someone you love when you finally get the full picture, and the full picture is worse than you thought. What I knew at the time was that she sounded tired. That she'd stopped talking about the future the way she used to excitedly, with plans and ideas and detours. That when I asked how things were going with Marcus, her answers got shorter and shorter until they were almost nothing at all. After the bus conversation with the stranger, something small shifted in her. She couldn't have named it then, but that night, instead of letting Marcus talk over her at dinner, they had dinner with friends. She finished her sentence. Just finished it calmly, while he was starting to talk over it, and looked at him and said, I wasn't done. Quietly. Not a fight. Just I wasn't done. He blinked. Their friends pretended not to notice. Emily felt something move in her chest, small and uncertain, like something that had been sleeping for a long time turning over in its sleep. She didn't know why the man on the bus had made her feel that way. She didn't even know if it was the man on the bus. Maybe it was just time. Maybe it was just something in the air that night. But I think it was him. I think the right words from an unexpected source, at the right moment, can do that. Like a key you didn't know you needed. 3 days passed. Emily went to work. She sat in meetings. She cooked dinner. She went for a run in the rain because she always ran in the rain in November, which I have never understood. Everything was the same. Everything was almost the same. And then on Friday, she took the 47 bus again. She almost didn't. She almost took the subway. But it was raining harder than usual and the subway entrance she normally used was partially blocked by construction, and she made a split-second decision that she only realized later might not have been entirely split-second at all. She got on the 47. She walked toward the back. She stopped. He was there. Same seat. Window. She stood in the aisle for a second, and he looked up, and there was a mutual beat of recognition that she said felt almost ridiculous. Like they were in a scene from something rather than just two people on a bus in Portland. She sat down across from him. You're still passing through? She said. He smiled. Not a big smile, a contained one, like something he was careful with. I extended my stay, he said. To do what? Another pause. This one longer. Figure something out, he said. She didn't push. They talked about other things. The city, a bookshop he'd found, the rain. He asked her what kind of work she did. She described it briefly, and he listened in a way that she noticed, the way some people actually listen and some people just wait. He was someone who actually listened. She asked what he did, and he said he'd been a teacher. Middle school science. And she laughed and said she couldn't imagine, and he said most people can't. But the kids were the best part were, she said. I'm between things, he said. She let it go. He let her let it go. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't happen easily with strangers. When her stop came, she stood. He said same time next week. And she said, laughing, I take the subway most days. And he said, I'll take my chances. She stepped off the bus, walked home in the rain, and she called me that night, and she was different. Not dramatically different, but lighter. The way she used to sound when she called me from college, when everything was still possible. Who is this person? I asked. I don't know, she said. We haven't even exchanged names yet, Emily. I know. You didn't tell him your name? We got talking and it didn't come up, and then it felt weird to bring it up later. That is absolutely unhinged, I said. She laughed. A real laugh. Full and unguarded. I hadn't heard that laugh in I don't know how long. And I sat with my phone pressed against my ear in my apartment in Chicago, and I thought, Whoever this person is on this bus, I am already a little bit grateful to him. I didn't know yet what grateful would come to mean. Now, I want to be clear about something, because I know how this sounds. I know the pattern your mind is already following. Woman in a failing relationship, chance encounter with a mysterious stranger, sparks on a bus in the rain. I know, but that's not what this is. Or not only what this is. Because the thing is, what Daniel gave Emily wasn't romance. Not then, not in the way you're probably imagining. What he gave her was harder to name and more important than that. He made her feel like herself. Not the self she'd been performing for Marcus. Not the self she wore to work, capable and contained. Not the daughter self she put on when she visited our parents and had to pretend everything was fine. Just herself. The version of her that said things like, I like who I was when I moved here, to a stranger on a bus. Because why not? Because it was true. Because she had nothing to lose. And she hadn't felt that way in years. The third time she saw him was not on the bus. This was 2 weeks after the second encounter. Emily had been walking home from a coffee shop. She'd been working there on a Saturday morning, writing the proposal she should have written during the week but kept putting off, and she was taking the long way home, because the long way went past a farmer's market she loved, even in November, especially in November, when there was hot cider and people looked real in their winter coats. She was at a stall looking at ceramic mugs when she heard someone say her name. She turned, and there he was, holding a paper cup of something hot, wearing that too big jacket, looking genuinely surprised. I didn't know your name was Emily, he said. I didn't know your name was... I still don't know your name, Daniel, he said. Emily, she said. And they shook hands in a ridiculous, formal way that made them both laugh, and the vendor behind the stall smiled at them like she was watching something she approved of. They walked through the market together. They split a cup of cider. He bought a jar of local honey because he said he'd been a beekeeper once. Briefly, disastrously, and honey still reminded him of the attempt. She bought one of the ceramic mugs, a green one with an irregular lip, and he said it was beautiful, and she said she had too many mugs, and he said there's no such thing. They talked for almost 2 hours. I don't know everything they talked about. Emily told me pieces, but I think some of it she kept, held close. The way you hold something that still feels a little fragile. But I know they talked about their families. He had a sister too, in Boston, someone he'd drifted from and was trying to find his way back to. I know they talked about teaching, about what it feels like to have a calling you've lost access to. I know he told her that the reason he'd been away from Portland for 7 years was something he still wasn't ready to talk about. But that being back felt like pressing on a bruise, painful but somehow necessary. And I know that at some point, she told him about Marcus. Not everything. Not the way he corrected her in public. Not the a lot to handle comment. Not the years of slow erosion. Just that she was in something she wasn't sure about. That she'd been in it long enough that she couldn't tell if she was holding on because she loved him or because she was scared of what leaving meant. Daniel didn't give her advice. He didn't tell her what to do. What he said was, I think you already know. I think the question is whether you're ready to act on what you know. She went home. Marcus was on the couch watching TV. He didn't ask how her morning had been. She stood in the kitchen making tea and thought about Daniel's words, and looked at the back of Marcus's head, and felt the specific weight of a life built around a wrong thing. That night she cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Then she washed her face, and went back out and sat on the couch, and Marcus put his arm around her, and she leaned into it because it was familiar. Because familiar can feel a lot like safe when you're tired, because the distance between knowing and doing is sometimes the widest distance of all. She called me the next morning. She was at a park, she said. She'd gone out early, before Marcus was awake. She needed air. She told me about Daniel. Everything this time, the first bus, the second bus, the market, the cider, the 2 hours of conversation, all of it. I listened without interrupting, which is something I am not known for. When she finished, I said, Are you in love with him? Long silence. I'm in something, she said. I don't know what to call it. It's like he reminded me of something I'd forgotten about myself. That can feel like love when you're starving for it, I said. Another silence. A softer one. I know, she said. I know. What are you going to do? I don't know. He's leaving, eventually. He said he's just here to figure something out, and I'm still with Marcus. And everything is complicated. Everything is complicated, I agreed. But Emily, I know Claire. You said he told you that you already know. A long pause, the sound of wind on her end. Leaves, maybe, or traffic, or just November in Portland. Yeah, she said quietly. He did. I want to tell you about the something Daniel was in Portland to figure out. Because I know now, even though I didn't then. And it matters more than anything else in this story. Emily found out slowly, over the course of the next several weeks, as they kept running into each other on the bus twice more. At a coffee shop once, at the library once, which she said felt like the universe making a point. Each time, a little more of Daniel came into focus. He was patient in the way of someone who has learned patience the hard way. He was funny without trying to be, which is the best kind of funny. He was honest in a way that was slightly painful, the way true honesty sometimes is, and he was carrying something. You could feel it around him, not constantly, not in every sentence, but in the pauses, in the way he sometimes looked at the middle distance for just a beat too long before answering a question. Something had happened to him. Something he was still in the middle of. She didn't push. He didn't offer. They built something careful and real. And then one evening in early December, they met for coffee deliberately for the first time. Not a coincidence. Not a bus. A planned meeting, which felt like a line being crossed. Or maybe a door being opened. She wasn't sure which, and she told me later she was trying hard not to think about it too much. They sat in a window booth at a place she loved. It was already dark outside, early the way December does it, and the coffee shop was warm and smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans. And somewhere around the second cup of coffee, Daniel put his hands around his mug and looked out the window for a moment. And then looked back at her and said, I need to tell you something. The air in the booth changed. She could feel it, the specific quality of a moment about to become before and after. Okay, she said. The reason I came back to Portland, he said. The thing I'm here to figure out. He stopped. She waited. 2 years ago, he said. I was diagnosed with something. A condition. I don't need to go into all the medical details, but the short version is that I had a very serious health crisis, and I recovered. I'm fine now, or mostly fine, or I'm here, which is what matters. But during the recovery, I lost a lot. My job, my apartment, a relationship, most of what I'd built, and the city I'd been living in felt like it belonged to a person who didn't exist anymore. He paused. She didn't speak. I moved back to Portland because I grew up near here, he said, and because I have something to settle. Something I left behind 7 years ago that I need to face before I can really move forward. And I didn't know when I got on that bus 3 weeks ago that I was going to end up in a coffee shop in December, telling a stranger I'd only been talking to for 30 seconds on the bus about any of this. So... He smiled, a little ruefully. She smiled back. You sneezed, she said. I sneezed, he agreed. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not romantically, or not only. The way you reach out to someone when they've handed you something true and you want to hold it carefully. What did you leave behind? She asked. If you want to tell me. He looked at her for a long moment. A grave, he said. My son. The world went quiet. She told me this part of the story and I had to put the phone down. I had to take a breath and pick it back up and ask her to continue. Because the weight of those 2 words, my son, was something I could feel through the phone across 1,000 miles, and I needed a second. His name was Owen. He had been 4 years old. He had died in a car accident 7 years ago, not in Portland, near Portland, on a highway 2 hours south of the city. Daniel had been driving. It had been raining. A truck had crossed the median. He had not been drinking. He had not been distracted. He had done nothing wrong except be on that road at that moment, which is the cruelest kind of thing. The kind that has no villain and no resolution, just an absence that takes up more space than a presence ever could. He had left Portland because he could not stay in the same city as the grave. He had left because every intersection, every park, every Sunday morning light felt like a wound. He had spent 7 years building a different life in Seattle, and then San Francisco, and then the health crisis, and then nothing. And then slowly, painfully, the decision to come back and what? He didn't have a word for it. Put something down. Pick something up. He wasn't sure. He had visited Owen's grave once since arriving in Portland, he told her. He had stood there for a long time and not known what to say, and then he had gone back to his rented room and stared at the ceiling. And the next morning he had gotten on a bus. That bus, that Tuesday, that sneeze. Emily sat with him in that coffee shop until they were the last people there, until the barista had wiped down every table around them and was pointedly stacking chairs. They talked about Owen, she asked, gently, carefully, and Daniel talked, which he said he almost never did. He described the way his son laughed, which was enormous and sudden and completely unconscious. He described the dinosaur phase. The specific way he said the word spaghetti. The absolute certainty, as a 4-year-old, that he was going to be an astronaut. They walked out into the cold night and stood on the sidewalk for a while, and Emily said, "I'm really glad I got on that bus," and Anya said, "I'm really glad your mother raised you paranoid." They stood there in the cold for a bit longer than the cold warranted, and then they went their separate ways home. Emily called me that night at 11:30. I was already asleep. I answered on the second ring because I always answer for Emily. She told me everything. I listened in the dark of my bedroom, sitting up against the headboard, my knees pulled to my chest. When she finished, neither of us said anything for a moment. Then I said, "What are you going to do about Marcus?" And she said, very quietly, "I'm going to end it." And there it was, like something that had been falling for a long time finally hitting the floor. Not dramatic, not a thunderclap, just finally. "When?" I said. "This week," she said. "I should have done it months ago. I should have done it a year ago. I needed to remember what it felt like, to feel like myself first, so that I knew I wasn't imagining that something was wrong." "You weren't imagining it," I said. "I know," she said. "I know that now. What happened with Marcus deserves its own telling, and I'll give it to you, but not yet." Because at the same time Emily was navigating all of this, something else was building. Something I didn't know about. Something she didn't entirely know about yet either. Daniel had been in Portland for almost a month now. He'd extended his stay once, then again. The rented room had become a short-term apartment. He'd been sending out applications, not for teaching yet, but for part-time work, a bookshop, a community center, something to give the days shape. And Emily had become part of the shape. They were careful about it. She was still technically with Marcus, and Daniel was well. Daniel was someone whose heart had been so thoroughly rearranged by grief and illness and starting over, that the idea of anything romantic felt to him like trying to remember how to walk after a long time in bed. Possible but uncertain. Something you had to believe in before you could actually do it. But something was there. Even I could hear it through the phone, a kind of lightness in her voice. When she talked about him, that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with recognition. The feeling of being known, of finding someone in whom you could place the whole truth of yourself and watch it be received without flinching. And then something happened that I still don't entirely know how to explain. It was a Saturday afternoon in mid-December. Emily had ended things with Marcus the Monday before. I'll get to that, I promise, and she was in a strange emotional weather. Relieved and sad and hollowed out in a way that felt both terrible and somehow clean. She was at the farmer's market again, the one where she and Daniel had first talked, and she wasn't looking for him. She genuinely wasn't. She was there for the hot cider and the ceramic vendor and the simple comfort of familiar things. She was standing at the edge of the market, looking at her phone, when a woman walked up to her and said her name. She looked up. The woman was maybe 50, well-dressed, gray-haired, with the kind of face that is very specific, not beautiful in a conventional way, but deeply memorable. The kind of face you see once and remember for years. "You're Emily," the woman said. "Emily from the bus." And Emily's first thought, she told me this exactly, was, "What bus?" "I'm sorry," she said. "Do I know you?" "No," the woman said. "But I think you know my son." Her name was Patricia. She was Daniel's mother. She had arrived in Portland the day before from Boston. Daniel had called her apparently for the first time in over a year. A call that had lasted 3 hours, and he had told her about Emily. Not everything, but enough. He had said there was a woman who had been kind to him at a moment when he hadn't known how badly he needed kindness. And that she had reminded him what it felt like to be a person again. Patricia had come because Daniel had asked her to, and because she had been waiting for years for a phone call like that one. She had come to the market because Daniel had mentioned Emily, loved it. She wasn't sure she'd find her there. She wasn't entirely sure what she was going to say if she did. Emily stared at her for a long moment. The market moved around them. Someone nearby was playing guitar, something quiet and unrecognizable. "Is he all right?" Emily said, because that was the first thing she thought to ask. Patricia looked at her with an expression that Emily described to me as a woman recognizing something she'd stopped hoping for. "Better than he's been in a very long time," she said. "Because of you, I think." Emily started crying. Right there, at the edge of the farmer's market, in the gray December light. She wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the week she'd just had, ending things with Marcus. The long conversations with Daniel. The strange feeling of being suspended between who she had been and who she was becoming. Maybe it was the way Patricia said "because of you" with such direct, uncomplicated certainty. Maybe it was just December and she was tired and some things crack you open at the seams. Patricia hugged her, a stranger, his mother, and Emily let her. They sat together for almost an hour. Patricia told her about Daniel as a boy, stubborn, curious. The kind of child who asked why about everything until you didn't have any more answers. She told her about Owen, just a little enough for Emily to understand what that grave meant. What it meant that Daniel had been able to visit it. What it meant that he'd been able to talk about it. She said, "There are years I wasn't sure he'd come back from it. Not from the accident alone, from the way he treated himself afterward. Like the grief was something he deserved." Emily didn't say anything. She thought about the things Daniel had told her about the years in Seattle. The way he'd described them. Going through the motions, but the motions of what? I was never sure. Patricia looked at her carefully and said, "He hasn't told you everything." "I know," Emily said. "I haven't told him everything either." "No," Patricia agreed. "But you will." "Right, that's what's different." They exchanged numbers. Patricia went back to her hotel. Emily stood at the market for a long time after her untouched cider growing cold in her hands. "She didn't call me that night." She texted, "Something happened and I need to think before I talk about it," which was unusual enough that I set my phone face up on the nightstand and did not sleep well. She called the next morning. "I need to tell you about the week before, about Marcus, because it's not a small thing and it deserves its place in this story." Emily had decided on Monday. She had rehearsed what she was going to say, which is very Emily. She's the kind of person who prepares for hard conversations the way other people prepare for job interviews. She had thought about it carefully. She knew what she wanted to say and what she didn't want to say, and how she wanted to leave room for his dignity while still being honest. She sat Marcus down after dinner. She said, "I need to talk to you about us." He said, "Okay." And his face did something she hadn't expected. It didn't look surprised. It looked like someone bracing for impact. Like someone who already knew what was coming but had been hoping not to. She said what she had prepared to say. She was calm. She was kind. She said it wasn't working, that she felt disconnected. that she had been unhappy for a long time and that she wasn't sure either of them were being fair to the other by continuing something that wasn't serving either of them. He didn't interrupt. He listened, and when she finished, he said, "I know." 2 words. She stared at him. "I've known for a long time," he said. "I just didn't want to be the one to say it. I thought if I didn't say it, it wasn't real." He paused. "That's not fair to you. I know that." She had prepared for anger, or for pleading, or for minimizing his usual modes. She had not prepared for this. For him sitting across from her looking tired and a little bit ashamed and honest, genuinely honest, for maybe the first time in years. They talked for a long time. Not about saving it. That conversation had already happened, had been happening invisibly for over a year and was now concluded. But about what it had been, the parts that were real, the ways they had genuinely loved each other once, even if that love had curdled into something unrecognizable. He apologized for the correcting. Not in a specific, itemized way. She didn't need that. But in the way of someone who had been looking at themselves clearly, maybe for the first time. She cried a little. He cried a little, which she had never seen him do. They ordered takeout because neither of them had eaten properly. They talked until midnight. She moved out 2 days later, into a sublet she'd found fast. A studio with a Murphy bed and a kitchen the size of a closet. And she called me from there, surrounded by boxers, eating leftover pad thai. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Terrified," she said, "and clean. Like I've been in a room with a slow leak, and I didn't know it, and now I'm outside and I can breathe." That is very descriptive for someone eating pad thai alone in a studio apartment. She laughed, willful, unguarded. "Claire," she said. "Yeah. I think I'm going to be okay." I let out a breath I'd been holding for, genuinely, about 2 years. "You're going to be so much better than okay," I said. Now, back to that Sunday morning call. The one after Patricia. Emily told me about meeting Daniel's mother. I listened without interrupting, which I am still not known for. When she finished, I said, "Do you realize what's happening?" "What?" "Lee. A man who had lost everything, who had closed himself off from the world for 7 years, who came back to Portland to face a grave he'd been running from, called his mother for the first time in over a year. And when she asked what changed, he told her about you." Silence. "He barely knows me," she said. "He knows you enough," I said. "And you know him enough." Sometimes that's the truth of it. She was quiet for a long time. Outside her window, I could picture the gray Portland sky, the wet streets, the early winter light that is simultaneously gloomy and beautiful. "I'm scared," she said. "He's leaving eventually. He said from the beginning he's just passing through." "Did he say that recently?" A pause. "No," she said. "He actually stopped saying it." I said. "Claire, I'm just noting. You're insufferable," she said, but softly. That week, something shifted. Or maybe it had already shifted and they were only just noticing. Daniel called her instead of waiting to run into her. They talked on the phone for 2 hours, then 3, about everything and nothing. He told her about Owen more than before, different things, little everyday things rather than just the large tragedy of it. The way Owen used to carry rocks in his pockets. How he'd insisted on sleeping with all his stuffed animals, arranged in a specific order. The exact weight of him asleep on Daniel's shoulder. And she told him about the years with Marcus. Not with bitterness, but with honesty. About the slow erosion. About learning to make herself smaller. About the moment on the bus. That first conversation with a stranger, when she'd said, "I'm less sure about who I am now," and felt, for the first time in a long time, like the most honest version of herself. "That's why I gave you the tissues," she said. "You looked like someone who needed something." "I did," he said. More than tissues, Christmas came. Emily stayed in Portland. She usually flew home to spend it with her parents. But this year, our parents were in Florida visiting my aunt. And I was in Chicago with my then boyfriend's family, and Emily had just moved into the studio and didn't want to spend the holiday on a plane. She invited Daniel to come for dinner. He brought wine and a small plant with a card that said, "You already have too many, but here's one more." I don't know everything about that evening. Emily only told me fragments, which I respected. But I know that at some point they were sitting on the floor of her studio apartment because she didn't have a proper table yet. Plates balanced on their laps, and she asked him if he'd gone back to Owen's grave again. He said yes. He'd gone the week before. He'd brought a small toy dinosaur he'd found at a market, a Stegosaurus. Owen had loved Stegosauruses specifically. He'd placed it against the stone and he'd sat there and he'd talked. For the first time, he'd talked. Not prayers or formal words. Just talking. About what had happened since. About Portland. About a woman on a bus who made him feel like himself for the first time in years. "I told him about you," he said. She put her plate down. "What did you say?" she asked. He looked at her. "I said I thought I might be starting to learn how to be okay again," he said. "And that it wasn't something I ever thought I'd be able to say." The apartment was quiet. The tiny lights she'd strung along the window were the only lights. "Daniel," she said. "I know," he said. "I know it's complicated. You just ended something. I'm still figuring out whether I live here or somewhere else or nowhere at all. I know all the reasons this is the wrong time." "I wasn't going to say that," she said. He looked at her. "I was going to say thank you," she said. "For being honest. For being the kind of person who talks to strangers on buses and accepts their tissues and says things like, 'I hope things get clearer,' and means it." "They did get clearer," he said. "For me too." She reached out and took his hand. Not for the first time they'd held hands, briefly, in the way of people who are being careful with each other. But this time was different. This time nobody let go. I'm not going to tell you that everything was easy after that. It wasn't. Easy is not the right word for any of this, and I don't think Emily would want me to use it. What I'll tell you is this. In January, Daniel found an apartment in Portland. A real one, not a short-term rental. He put his boxers down, put his things on shelves. He hung one framed photo Owen at 3 years old, sitting in a patch of sunlight, laughing at something off camera, impossibly alive. In February, he reached out to a school district in Portland about a teaching position. In March, Emily started writing again. She'd kept a journal in college, through her 20s, and had stopped without noticing. The way you stop doing things that are good for you when you get busy surviving. She bought a green notebook, the same green as the ceramic mug she'd bought at the market. In April, she called me from the farmer's market. She was standing at the same stall, looking at mugs. Daniel was beside her. I could hear him in the background making some comment about the excessive mug situation. "Tell her it's not excessive," she said, holding the phone toward him. "I would never say that," he said, clearly into the phone. "There is no such thing as too many mugs." I laughed and I had to put the phone down for a second, the way you have to when something makes you feel too much to contain properly. She put the phone back to her ear. "Claire," she said. "I'm happy." She said it simply, plainly, without qualification, which is how you know it's true. Not, "I think I'm happy" or "I'm starting to feel better." Just, "I'm happy." Sat with that for a moment. The simplicity of it, how hard it had been to get there, how close she had come to never getting there at all, not on that bus, not at that market, not in that coffee shop. How a sneeze and a packet of tissues and a stranger's voice saying "I hope things get clearer" had somehow been the thread that led her back to herself. "I know," I said. "You knew before I did," she said. "I usually do," I said. She laughed. "I've told you most of this story now, but I need to tell you one more thing. The part I've been sitting with the longest. The part that I keep coming back to, turning over in my hands like a smooth stone." In October, almost exactly a year after the bus, Emily and Daniel went back to Owen's grave together. She asked if she could come. He said yes, after a long pause, and then again, more certainly, yes. She didn't tell me much about it. She didn't need to. But she told me one thing. She said they brought 2 things to the grave. The Stegosaurus was still there, weathered a little now, stubborn against the stone, and they brought something else. From the farmer's market, a ceramic thing, small, glazed green. The same green as the mug, the same green she'd chosen the day they met. She said she placed it there and didn't try to find words. And Daniel put his arm around her, and they stood there in the October light without speaking. And after a long time, he said, quietly, to the stone, to the air, to whatever exists beyond the things we can see, "I'm okay, buddy. I'm actually okay." She said she cried so hard she couldn't see. And she said it wasn't the kind of crying that hurts, it was the other kind. The kind that means something has finally let go. She told me this on the phone from her apartment, their apartment now. The one with tall windows and too many plants and one framed photo of a little boy in a patch of sunlight. And when she finished, I said the only thing I could think to say, "I'm so glad you got on that bus." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Me too." There's a version of this story where Emily doesn't get on the bus, where she stands at the corner in the rain for 30 more seconds and decides, no, it's too wet, I'll wait for the subway. Where she never sits down across from a stranger with a too big jacket and a spectacular sneeze. Where she stays in the apartment with Marcus for another year, or 2, or 3, grinding down into something she wouldn't recognize as herself. Where Daniel stays in his rented room in Portland for 6 weeks and figures out nothing and goes back to wherever people go when they've run out of places to run. I think about that version sometimes. Not for long. But I think about it. And then I think about the other one. The one where she almost didn't, but did. Where one small ordinary decision, rain, mist, subway, half a block, became the string that unraveled everything that needed to be unraveled and stitched back. Together everything that needed stitching. The stranger on the bus, who said nothing more remarkable than thank you. And then turned it into a conversation about belonging and loss and the strange geography of becoming someone. We spend so much time trying to find the right thing, the right life, the right person, the right moment. And sometimes, the right thing gets on a bus at the wrong time and sneezes, and you hand it a tissue, and it hands you your life back. I don't think about this because it's a pretty story. I think about it because it's a true one. Because Emily is sitting in an apartment right now, right this minute, probably arguing with Daniel about plants. And she is herself in a way she hadn't been for years before that Tuesday. And Daniel is teaching again. Middle school science. The kids are the best part, he says. They always were. And somewhere in a Portland cemetery? In the October light, or the winter rain, or the strange warm days that come in March, when you don't expect them? There is a small green ceramic thing on a stone. And a stegosaurus, weathered and stubborn. And a 4-year-old boy who, for a brief and incandescent time, filled his father's pockets with rocks and laughed like nothing in the world was small. I like to think he knows. I like to think they all do.